I just like to get Graham up next and keep the conversation to afterwards. Graham, if you wouldn't mind sort of taking on some of those themes and talking especially about repopulation and regeneration, that would be great.
To borrow Patrick Geddes' trio of past, present and possible, Neil's helpfully given a resume of Glasgow's past, and hopefully we can in the next while start to then unpack Glasgow's present and talk about Glasgow's possible future. So my name is Graham Ross from Austin Smith Lord, and I'm a member of a team that's been working with Chris and with other colleagues on this call, Judith and Peter, whom you'll hear from in a minute, and working with Ian Elder at Glasgow City Council, who's also with us this evening, looking at Glasgow City Centre in particular. So you'll recognise some of the themes and issues that Neil set up and how the city is trying to grapple with them. And as Neil talked about the competitive advantage of being at the northwest periphery of Europe, Glasgow has a long and proud tradition as a great European city. It clearly shares many of the challenges that other cities face, but trying to come up with a distinctive and locally distinctive approach to how we grapple with those global issues is crucial. And of course, whilst many will conceive of Scotland as being largely rural, and of course it is, it's a highly urbanised country with the vast majority of people living in the towns and the villages and cities of Scotland. And as Neil's just outlined, of course, Glasgow is Scotland's largest city and its only metropolitan centre. So the reach of Glasgow and the importance of Glasgow and its city centre is crucial, not only to the city, but also to the city region and indeed to the nation. More than half of Scotland's 5.3 million population can get to Glasgow city centre within an hour or thereby, and so its economic, environmental, social and cultural health and performance is crucial for the nation as a whole. In looking at Glasgow city centre, as with every city, there's of course a context with respect to city ambition and declared plans and policy context within which to work. And I want to specifically talk this evening about the city centre and the district regeneration frameworks that have emerged from the Glasgow City Centre strategy. I would also recommend that you look at the Connectivity Commission that Glasgow undertook in the last few years, and I don't doubt that Chris will talk some more about the recommendations that the Connectivity Commission has brought forward. So in the city centre strategy, it defines 9 city centre districts that overlap with one another, but crucially also overlap and straddle the river and the motorway, the M8, that runs through the city centre. And these are the planning units that we've inherited as part of our consultant team that have been asked to take forward regeneration frameworks for 8 of the 9 that are on the screen. And so myself and colleagues at Austin Smith Lord and MVRDV of Rotterdam, along with a number of others, including Peter, who's also on the call this evening, undertook the preparation of regeneration frameworks for these 4 districts. And Peter, Chris, Judith and I are part of a team that's just been commissioned to look at the next and final 4 in the piece. And I'll say something about all of these districts in the next wee while. Glasgow City Council quite rightly required us and demanded that we took an evidence-based approach, and so we've been working with Space Syntax and others to assess and analyse the data that's available and undertake that analysis, but of course enrich that through creative conversation and through engagement with as broad an array of Glaswegians as we possibly could, those that live, work, study and invest in the city, but also those that come from further afield and have a stake and a passion for what goes on within the city centre itself. And so, of course, borrowing the People Make Glasgow slogan that the city goes by and that you saw in Neil's opening slide, we've adapted that, I suppose, as the kind of the motif of the project. It's not our city centre. This is very much a collective effort, and we're very eager to engage in conversations with groups such as the Urban Design Group, but indeed, others who have some guidance and some advice to give from your own perspectives, but also to, through authentic participatory planning, engage with citizens to shape their future and work with, with communities to develop and establish that collective vision. And so it's not only about big strategic moves, it's very much about a bottom-up community-led approach, be that business, resident, civic, cultural community, but also facing into some of the big strategic challenges and in the inheritance and legacy that Neil outlined from some of those planning moves in the mid-20th century. So trying to build up a tempo of small-scale, quick wins, as well as some of those longer-term, transformational, long-term projects. Of course, as I said at the outset, whilst taking a local approach, it's about also facing into the shared and global challenges that we all face. And of course, Glasgow is due to be hosting the COP26 UN Climate Change Conference this year. It's now scheduled for November 21. But using that and using some other aspects of contemporary society and the challenges that they were facing into to act as a catalyst to start to have a conversation about what next for Glasgow and what next for these communities. And remembering, of course, as Neil outlined, that intelligent investment in infrastructure, of course, the merchants of Glasgow that Neil referred to, that Glasgow had in the 18th century invested in the opening up the river, and of course that then opened up Glasgow to grow in the way that Neil outlined. And if we can capture some of that boldness, but perhaps temper it with some of the hubris that perhaps the 20th century planning story tells us, to of course, get the essence of that gallousness, that self-confidence that Glaswegians proclaim, and infuse that with the creativity of local people and that creative economy that we enjoy in the city, but do that in a way which is tempered with a sense and respect for people, of place, and of the planet. Of course, when we look at these 9 districts, we've got to recognise that these are, artificial planning boundaries, and of course, the granular sense of character and distinctiveness at a neighbourhood and street level is very rich. And so, getting the grips with and understanding that rich built heritage and the story that Neil has outlined, overlaid with the social heritage, is crucial. And of course, starting to also understand and map out some of the inequalities and issues that the city faces. Of course, in the invitation to this evening's session, there's reference to the Glasgow effect and that issue of understanding why population health generally in the city doesn't compare well with other equivalent cities, but also trying to understand how to bridge the gap between the health inequalities, the issues of social justice and economic and environmental justice within the city. And we want to absolutely face into that in the projects through the regeneration frameworks, aligned with the broader endeavour that's outlined in those strategic documents that the city has already published and I referred to earlier on. So of course it's about understanding that patchwork of issues, the socioeconomic performance, the cultural assets, the access to jobs, the access and connection to opportunity, and indeed those areas where there is, for instance, transport poverty. And Chris in particular and our team has been mapping and looking at where those blind spots are within the city's urban mobility network and ways in which we can make sure that we can reconnect communities to the destinations, and everybody therefore has cause and access to get to the city centre itself. Of course, those 9 districts, when you look at them as jigsaw pieces, have very different spatial characteristics. And when you start to analyse in terms of how we occupy space and the amount of vacant and derelict land, or underused or inappropriately used open space, there is clearly scope for transformation, and there's clearly scope to backfill and adjust the way in which the city is occupied, attending to some of those legacy issues that Neil outlined in his opening remarks. And of course, when you also then start to look at land use and activity within the city, there are clearly pockets where there is compact and mixed use, but there are other neighbourhoods and other districts where there is a monoculture, and that zonal planning has left us with some aspects of the city that very much warrant being enriched with that greater mix of use. So the debate over the last few years in the course of the first regeneration frameworks that were undertaken through from 2015 to last year, and the next round of regeneration frameworks is of course about what goes where and why, and who and how will we deliver this. So starting to map that, the possibilities, the priorities in the city, starting to understand the array of potential projects, large and small, and not be overwhelmed by the sheer scale of creativity and idea generation that's come through this process, but start to develop those priorities strategically, clearly, and aligned with measures of success, be they in terms of the repopulation of the city, be they in terms of the adjustment of how we use open space and reduce car dependency, or be they about how we make sure that we align the political will at a local, regional and national level so that we can secure and deliver change in the medium and longer term. So of course it's about setting those objectives, of course it's about that participatory planning approach, but it's also about finding ways in which we can break down silos, enable the culture of collaboration, and apply the notion that the Scottish Government have launched through their place principle of ensuring that collaborative effort ensures delivery and quality of delivery for all at a local level. We have the benefit of a city centre strategy board, we have the benefit of city deal funding, but trying to ensure that we can monitor change, monitor the performance of the city, and monitor how the implementation of these recommendations, how they impact the city going forward, is something that we need to get sharper about so that we can have very much a more informed and agile approach to how we approach city planning. So of course, as Chris has alluded to, it's about therefore achieving that mixed use. It's about re-densifying Glasgow. So as Neil outlined, there was a point in time where Glasgow was one of the densest cities in Northern Europe. Well, it's rapidly slid down the scale, as you can see. So seeking ways in which we can, utilise the opportunity and the space we have in the city, repopulate and appropriate vacant and underused space within our existing and rich built heritage, as Neil's outlined with the monies that the Heritage Trust and others have, and seek ways in which we can try and find the right level of urban density within the city centre, coupled with an appropriate social and community infrastructure that ensures that the schools, the health and social care infrastructure is there to enable all age groups and all facets of society to find a place and cause to live in Glasgow city centre is going to be absolutely crucial. Of course, how we optimise the available space in Glasgow is vital as well, and whilst we've perhaps given a sense that there is a surplus of open space, and indeed there is in many aspects, how we use the amount of open space in comparison to, for instance, the ratios that other cities have is another thing that's been informing our analyses. So when you look at Glasgow in terms of, in comparison with an equivalent city centre areas, other UK cities, Glasgow has a disproportionately high amount of space given over to the motor car. So can we get that balance right? And of course, you'll be well versed, many on this call have seen these slides in the past in terms of winning back space for active travel, for pedestrians, for walking, wheeling and cycling, such that we can perhaps use the great urban grid of Glasgow, not in a glib way in terms of applying a Tartan approach, but applying an intelligent and smart approach to how we use and perhaps adapt to likes of the superblock model so that we utilise and benefit from a more appropriate and a hierarchical approach to using that urban grid. And then use the space that we've got within the great Georgian street pattern that Neil's outlined to greater effect and transform some of these routes to be far more about connecting communities by active travel means rather than simply providing space for every single conceivable mode of transport on every conceivable street. Of course, in recent times post-COVID, we've been, we've supercharged the notion of prototyping and trying before we buy, and we've been encouraging the city leadership for a number of years now, as has Chris, in terms of ways in which to test and trial in advance of actually implementing some of these measures. Glasgow also suffers from the issue of a disaggregated and disconnected public transport system in terms of the networks, in terms of how they're operated. And time and again, we faced into the issue of how to organise the various modes of transport in the city centre. And Chris will say some more, no doubt, in terms of that agenda in his presentation. But suffice to say that despite the beaching cuts, Glasgow still retains 6 mainline railway stations within a very compact city centre. 2 of the 3 largest stations in Scotland are within the city centre. And so maximising and optimising the benefit, investing in the public transport inheritance we have from the Victorians in a way which ensures that we achieve that modal shift, maintain that quality of public transport network, notwithstanding the challenges that the post-COVID era provide us. And then look at the urban edges. And of course, Neil outlined the challenge of the motorway coming through the city, but also that disregard for the river. Glasgow made the Clyde and the Clyde made Glasgow, but it's somewhat fallen out of love with its river over the last period of time, in trying to create not only a place to gather, but attend to what was in the previous slide, the lack of quality open space within the city centre, such that the river becomes that great urban gathering space within Glasgow city centre. Is a long-held ambition, but one which we are starting to see, following this work, a sense of momentum towards achieving that. And getting a sense of using both banks of the river. You cannot walk on both banks of the river for the full length of what you can see on the slide at this point in time. Let's make sure that we join those assets, such as the hydro and the SEC and the Riverside Museum, back to the city centre, so that we have a continuous blue-green infrastructure that joins up the city. Let's reintroduce the city to its river, so you don't have to cross 6 lanes of traffic, as this family are doing, to get down by the water's edge. And then we get to a point where we rediscover the fact that Glasgow city centre benefits from that north bank location, south-facing aspect over the river, and ensure that we can enliven the river banks, but also the river itself. And of course, one way might be to start to utilise the river as a mode of transport and a means of pleasure, rather than simply as a place to get past and a barrier in the city itself. And Chris, I'm not sure I'm doing for time, but I'll perhaps just close with some remarks about the M8, and then just a little flavour of the project that we're about to embark on, or we've just started to embark on, which is the motorway itself. Of course, as Neil mentioned, there's the relics of parts of the Bruce plan, and we have the legacy of that, as you can see here in the Anderson Cross area. And looking at ways in which we can repair the severance created by the motorway on the north and the western side of the city centre is fundamental. We have new motorway infrastructure in the city region that, to our mind, presents an opportunity to avoid driving motorway traffic through the city centre, and perhaps it allows us to then start to untangle the motorway spaghetti that we have, and start to prune some of those on and off ramps, win back space, and utilise the infrastructure that we have for the meantime to start to heal and to repair and reconnect the communities that have been severed by the motorway infrastructure in innovative ways, and perhaps not be able to rapidly get back to the node that was Anderson Cross and is now this, but perhaps start to find ways in which we can repair and rejoin the city together, so that communities can access the city centre, enjoy and benefit the city centre, and the future then provides a set of priorities that are about enhancing quality of life. And so Chris and Peter and Judith and myself are on a team that's led by Studio for New Realities and Austin Smith Lord and Urban Movement, and we're looking at the next 4 regeneration frameworks. And I would use this evening as a call for ideas and a call for guidance in terms of how we tackle the legacy issues that Neil outlined in the Merchant City that some of you may be familiar with in the southeastern edge of the city. The Learning Quarter that goes all the way from George Square in the west to the Necropolis in the east, and the cathedral you can see there with the green roof. Townhead nestling just next to the motorway, and Junction 15 in the northeastern corner of the city, and Cowcaddens, which spans the northern edge of the city and goes up to the canal and across to the inner west end. So it's about healing, it's about addressing the legacies that Neil's mentioned. It's about trying to conceive of how we refresh and reimagine the comprehensive development areas of Cowcaddens and Townhead, and start to ensure that we infuse that with an agenda that's about quality of life, about creating a healthy, dynamic and thriving city, and one which is working at all of the scales, both as a great international and European city, as a city that drives the Scottish economy and culture, but also one which is a great place to live in the everyday for those that live, work, study and invest in the city. And always remembering, as Neil's outlined, that Glasgow starts here. So I'll just skip a few slides to close on the fact that at this point in time, we're just building a baseline and starting to develop an evidence base, and we're about to embark on developing proposals with communities. We're clearly, we would have dearly loved to have been in a scenario where we could have done as we did before, engage on street, in situ, with those that are in their neighbourhoods and in their districts. And we hope to do that in time when it's safe to do so. But in the meantime, we've established a range of online tools and ways in which you can contact the team, as well as a free phone line. And we can hopefully circulate these details to you all after the event. And we would urge you to engage with us. And hopefully we get to a point where through creative collaboration and co-design, we can develop a future for this young girl and for all the rest of the future generations of Glasgow that seeks to learn from the lessons and from the past that Neil's outlined, good and bad, and seeks to create a city that enjoys a great quality of life in a fantastic location. Thank you. Thanks,
Graham. That's a fantastic flavour of the huge amount of work that Glasgow is undertaking at the moment to reimagine the city. And I really look forward to and welcome the audience's thoughts on how we can improve the city centre going forward.